is Hard Pass, an analysis of press coverage of the top political story of the day. White House correspondent Brian Karam and university journalism professors Dr. Michael Meyer and Dr. Mark Mederson host Hard Pass. In this episode, Don't Shoot the Messenger. The team will be offering analysis of the litigation between Donald Trump and multiple media outlets. Gentlemen?
And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, my mustache comes to you with a heavy heart because while I was on vacation, my parent corporation, Paramount, paid Donald Trump a $16 million settlement over his 60 Minutes lawsuit. As someone who has always been a proud employee of this network, I am offended. And I don't know if anything will ever repair my trust in this company. But just taking a stab at it, I'd say $16 million would help. This settlement is for a nuisance lawsuit Trump filed claiming that 60 Minutes deceptively edited their interview with then-candidate Kamala Harris last fall. Paramount knows they could have easily fought it because, in their own words, the lawsuit was completely without merit. And keep in mind, Paramount produced Transformers: Rise of the Beast. They know completely without merit. Now, I believe this kind of complicated financial settlement with a sitting government official has a technical name in legal circles. It's big fat bribe. Because this all comes as Paramount's owners are trying to get the Trump administration to approve the sale of our network to a new owner, Skydance.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm Mark Mederson. Welcome to Hard Pass. With me, as always, are Brian Karam from Salon and several other media outlets, White House correspondent. Brian, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And Dr. Michael Meyer, a research partner of mine and also an office mate of mine when we were both in the PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Mike, welcome.
Greetings from Brooklyn, New York. The subway is not as scary as Sean Duffy might have us believe. I was just on it.
Hey now.
Okay, I wasn't expecting that. So the story that we're going to start with today is the cancellation of The Late Show by CBS. Many media pundits have speculated that the cancellation is the result of a media ownership deal involving the parent company of CBS, Paramount. As Colbert noted in the clip that you just heard, Paramount has been working for some time on a deal with a company called Skydance Media. It's believed that Skydance would be paying about $8 billion for the controlling stake in Paramount. Now, there's a lot of elements to this story. Let me see if I can clarify a few things before we dig in. For its part, CBS released this statement regarding the cancellation of The Late Show, saying that it is, quote, purely a financial decision against a challenging backdrop in late night, end quote. Now, many media pundits have pointed out that this seems a bit odd since The Late Show is ranked number one at that time slot, and that it may more to do with what Colbert said about CBS and Paramount just days before the show was canceled. As you heard in the clip, Paramount had settled a lawsuit with Trump, which Colbert joked about as, quote, a big fat bribe, end quote. This is because big corporate media deals like this one that may happen between Skydance and Paramount require government oversight. In this case, the Federal Communications Commission would have to approve the deal before it could go through. Now, according to Axios, Skydance CEO David Ellison met with the head of the FCC just 2 days before the cancellation of The Late Show. The day after the cancellation was announced, Trump said, quote, I absolutely love that Colbert got fired, adding, I hear Jimmy Kimmel is next. First, Dr. Meyer, can you give some background on what Trump sued CBS's 60 Minutes over and why the settlement might matter?
The initial 60 Minutes lawsuit was about an interview that 60 Minutes conducted with Kamala Harris during the campaign. The claim that Trump made was that the 60 Minutes interview was edited creatively in order to protect Kamala Harris and inflict some level of damage on Donald Trump. The thing to understand about that lawsuit is that it is, I believe the technical term for it is completely baseless. It's not clear. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not legally trained. That ultimately that editing an interview is not a crime. There's no libel. There's no libel claim that can really be attached to the editing of the interview under any sort of recognized version of libel law. So Trump used the same technique that he used against George Stephanopoulos and ABC News, the filing of libel law, in order to secure using libel law in order to secure a claim against somebody. Now we can talk about sort of what that means and the broader implications of what libel law are, although that's maybe more than we want to get into here. But ultimately, what they have found, what Trump has found, is a technique to get corporate ownership to capitulate to his desires, and it helps in this case that the owners of Paramount, the owners of CBS, the company that owns CBS right now, wants this merger to go through, and therefore lawsuits, arguments with the administration are gonna have a different valence.
Brian, the president himself has sued a number of media entities. Some like CBS and ABC decided to settle. The latest outlet being sued by Trump, the Wall Street Journal, at least for now, unless you've heard something else, seems to be willing to move forward in defending the story they reported about the Ghislaine Maxwell birthday card to Epstein, which the Journal reported contained some rather inappropriate content. The president.
Bawdy. I don't know if it's inappropriate, just juvenile.
Okay. Inappropriate for some audiences. The president has also reduced the space for journalists who ask him tough questions while opening space for those who don't. According to Rebecca Hamilton, a law professor at American University, quote, "There's no doubt that President Trump has an intimate understanding of the significance of the relationship between the media and the public. That is why he is consistently shrinking the access of outlets whose reporting he doesn't like and expanding the space for outlets with coverage he does like." Brian, your boots are on the ground at the White House. Do you agree with Professor Hamilton's assessment?
I disagree with everybody. Let me start with there is actually a term for what Donald Trump is doing, and it's called a SLAPP suit. It's a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And he didn't find it. He didn't discover it. He's just using it better than others. And the fact of the matter is, if you go back to this specific lawsuit that he's fought, well, go back to the CBS one. That one, 60 Minutes, he only found out that it had been edited because guess what CBS did? It produced the entire transcript of the interview, even the stuff it had edited out, and put it online so people could read it. So the idea that they had edited it creatively to hurt him runs counterintuitive to the simple fact that the information was there, and he wouldn't have even known it was edited that way unless he had one of his people, not him because he doesn't read, had access to that. That's how that lawsuit came about. It's all about intimidation, every bit of it. So what he's doing now, yes, he has limited access, but I would say it's worse than that. When I first walked into the Brady briefing room many years ago, there was a reporter, it may have been Sam. It was one of the people I looked up to, told me, "Brian, at some point in time, you're going to walk in here and you're going to want to grab the press secretary by the throat and shake them and throttle them until they tell you the fucking information that they're supposed to be providing you that they don't want to provide you because they're playing games." He said, "Now, when that happens, take a breath and don't strangle them, but smile and remind them that the reason why they're there is to provide information, and you are simply doing your job trying to get it." Now, it took me about, and I've come to that with every administration. I've ever covered. It took me about a year, well, about 6 months during the first Donald Trump administration to get to the point where I wanted to, choke the living crap out of more than several of the people in there. It took less than a day this time. And what they've done is not only are they limiting access to the president while claiming they've increased it, which is, they're good at lying, but they're also not returning phone calls. They're not returning texts. They're not returning emails. When Donald Trump had the recent bill that he passed after it was, the big, beautiful bill, after 30 minutes of meeting with people who were going to vote against it, they decided to vote for it. The natural question was to go into the press secretary and say, all right, so what deals were struck? And what they said in lower press was the president is entitled to a private conversation. And we said, yes, of course he's entitled to private conversations. However, at the end of the day, there is something on this piece of legislation that starts with a P, L, and then a number. And that PL is public law. So whatever deals you struck with other legislators are, as a matter of fact, necessary to be heard by the public. And we were told, no, that we can make these deals in private and we don't have to tell you what they are, which is what, by the way, the Supreme Court is now doing, issuing numerous decisions that benefit Donald Trump without providing any contextual information as to what was the substance and what was the decision process in doing it. So it's far worse than limiting. They have taken over the assignments in the briefing room. The incoming president of the White House Correspondents Association has told members that the administration says it's up for renegotiating that, which means absolutely zilch. They will tell you who they want in that room. They will tell you how it's going to go. Donald Trump has not had a press conference, a traditional press conference, where he's been in front of a couple of hundred people in the Brady briefing room or in the East Room or out on the tarmac, anywhere. He meets with very small numbers of people inside the press pool that have been chosen by him. And there'll be one or two outliers because they can't get rid of everyone, but they've tried to. And the ones who've asked the hardest questions and pushed back the most are the members of Reuters, Jeff Mason, Steve Holland, who are now, along with the AP, not in the pool at all. So it is far worse than just limiting access. It's determining who's there and then limiting response, limiting explanations. This is government by secrecy. This is dangerous. And it is also shows what this Colbert shows is that it's very disheartening and dangerous for a democracy to squelch satire and humor. And it was LBJ who was skewered by, and I think it was the Smothers Brothers, and he wrote him a letter and said, listen, and I put this in my column, he said, and I'm paraphrasing LBJ, but he said we should never be so small-minded that we can't laugh at ourselves. Well, that's what Donald Trump is. He's too small-minded to laugh at himself and too damn scared to laugh at himself. He walked out and gave the Genius Award by acclaiming his genius. I'm giving a Genius Award. It's named after me. The only time he's funny is when he's making fun of someone else or praising himself, and then he's inappropriately funny. He cannot, for the life of him, laugh at himself. And that, to me, is the mark of a very insecure and very ignorant human being who is a very dangerous, caustic chemical in the solvency of democracy. So it's far worse. It's good. There's 1,278 days left to go in this administration, and I guarantee you each day is going to get worse. There's some hope for you.
Thank you for that high note. One of the things that I think we have to mention that I've been reading about, just to make sure we're balanced in our reporting, is that the Colbert or the Late Show was not making money, and I'm not sure.
Well, can we talk a little bit about that? Because
sure.
That's not. Look, there is some legitimacy in the changing of late night television. There is some legitimacy to that issue, but there are ways to address it without canceling the guy who's bringing you the highest ratings. And by the way, it networks are notorious for making something that they want to go away look like it's not making money. It wouldn't be the first time that they've said, oh, we're not making that much money. It's the number one show. Horseshit. It is making money. Horseshit. You've got. Have you seen the advertising? There's advertising on that show that's making bundles. But there is an issue, and and there is an issue about money. But they're being dishonest in how they're addressing their audience and addressing the nation. Donald Trump put the squeeze and is putting the squeeze on education and on part of the big beautiful bill wants to make it impossible for anyone who can't afford to go to college to go to college. Only if you go to college can you afford to go to college do they want you to go. So who does that favor and how does that work? Again, they want to tell you how to think. And this thing with Colbert, what's the timing of it? Well, it happened when? And it happened how? By the way, if you're going to, and he was surprised by it, you could put him on streaming. You could cut his budget. You could tell him he has to renegotiate his price. You can cut down on the number of people and interns. There are many ways to cut costs, which both David Letterman and Johnny Carson employed when they were getting grief from their networks. And then they also came back with him and said, screw you, I've got the ratings. You got to make it work. That's show business. What's not show business is kowtowing to this moron, this lunatic who can't stand to be poked fun at. And you know exactly what this is about because what did you say in the introduction, Mark? Donald Trump said Jimmy Kimmel's next. He wants to go after everyone. If you don't, the only time Donald Trump is transparent is when he's telling you why he's going to go after you. That's his number one play. That's his man. That's his soft spot. That's his sweet spot. That's when he's humming. When he's out there and he's riffing. When he's telling you why he hates you, and he wants to go after anyone who makes fun of him, and that's a fact.
Dr. Meyer, excuse me, without going too deeply into the First Amendment and freedom of speech, there is a phenomenon known as
those things.
known as the chilling effect when it comes to speech. I'm sure you teach about this in your classes. What is the chilling effect?
Right. So the chilling effect is the idea that actions by government, actions by people who can put you in jail, who can create employment issues for journalists who are on the ground, are going to prevent reporters from doing things. So some of the access rules can have a chilling effect. They may not, if you're a reporter and you see that Jeff Mason and the AP are not being allowed into the pool, maybe you're going to think twice about asking a slightly harder question. That's going to chill what you're going to say. The chilling effect doesn't always come from government, right? So if you work for a outlet and the publisher is friends with a certain person, you may be less likely to write about that person's dirty dealings in the world. So that may also be another version of the chilling effect. The idea really with the chilling effect is that there are external pressures. There are things that come to bear on the journalist or on the outlet that prevent them from doing the public's work. When we talk about a conflict of interest, the definition of conflict of interest is really when you are talking about, when you're not bringing the truth to the public for reasons that are not clear to the public. And so a conflict of interest, if you know that your boss wants to put this merger through, maybe you decide not to run a certain story on your news publication. 60 Minutes bosses they resigned rather than continue to play that game. But ultimately, eventually the boss is going to find somebody who will succumb to that pressure. I think we should think about, sort of broadly speaking, was Colbert making money? I don't know how much I should know this. I don't know much in ad costs, on national ad costs. on CBS's show, right? I know if you go onto Google, they're saying like $50 to $100,000 per national ad, right? That's money going to CBS. It seems outlandish to me that you're not making money off of, if you're selling that many ads, right? It doesn't seem to me outlandish that you're not making money off of the show. Maybe not every individual episode makes money, but at a certain point, you've paid off what you're paying. But again, I'm not going to say one way or the other because I'm not an expert on that. But we should think about the way that that the money side of the business affects what we see. Colbert got fired because the money side of the business has changed so much. The question of sort of what journalists are doing has changed because the money side of the business has changed so much in the last 30 years in journalism. We would hope that a big corporation would be a good steward of news because it is powerful and rich enough to serve a countervailing force. What we're seeing instead is that the corporate needs of the parent companies are taking greater precedence over what the public needs to know, over the choices that journalists are making. The chilling effect is one thing, but it's also just a function of news being less economically important to these companies that own news outlets. And that ultimately is the challenge that we need to be thinking about as to what news should look like going forward. Because very clearly, Skydance is this merger is an $8 billion merger. That should be a big enough and strong enough company to be able to stand up to what an administration wants. And if they're willing to lay down for them, then that becomes a problem. What institutions have gone and enacted the president's agenda versus which ones have stood up for themselves? That's the question that we really need to look at. And in news, that's especially true because the news institutions are the ones that are supposed to tell us what's happening. And if they're not telling us, how are we going to know?
And Brian, we mentioned earlier that Trump is known for being litigious and that some media entities have chosen not to move forward in defending themselves. The president pulled your hard pass, which seemed to be an effort to silence you from reporting on him. You fought back and won multiple times. Tell us about that experience for you.
Well, first of all, let's see. The chilling effect is real. There are people in the White House press office who simply do not and will not challenge the President of the United States for fear of losing personal access or B, for fear of losing their job. That's a fact. There's also something called the Streisand effect. The more you don't want to talk about something, the more it's going to be talked about. And you can, that happened with Barbara Streisand talking about something. She enhanced the infamy of the person saying it about her rather than by suing them. So the fact of the matter is it can have an opposite effect. And Donald Trump's actions often have the unintended opposite effect. It's not that our properties are less economically interesting to larger companies. It's the fact that all they care about is the economic effect. Money. They just want to make money. So we're screwed going in there. And so fighting Donald Trump, when he tried to pull my hard pass, it was after something had occurred on the, doesn't even exist anymore, the Rose Garden, out in the Rose Garden. I had said something like I had asked him to stick around after he had met with his new media people and his right wing advocates that he had sitting in all the chairs, and I said, hey, could you stick around, take a few questions? And somebody said he's already taken questions from the real press, and I said, looks like, and I even did it in a Rodney voice, I think. Looks like a group was eager to be demonically possessed. And it got a few laughs, but then the moron who sells fish oil came out and started screaming. And the next thing you know, I get my press pass pulled. And so no one told me about it. In fact, the only action Stephanie Grisham took in the year that she was a press secretary, she never had one briefing. The only official action she took was to pull my press pass. So we beat him in court 3 times. Don't give in. In fact, I had this conversation with editors who said, well, maybe we just take a week, in the shorts, and then we'll get an exclusive interview with him. I said, no, this isn't about me, and it isn't about Playboy. This is about everybody, that he cannot do this. So they came around to backing me up, and we went toe to toe with a guy and beat him. And that's what you're going to have to do, is stand up to this guy. Now, I think it's going to be hilarious if 20 years from now the history books say it was Jeff Epstein that united the United States for the first time in a long time, because this issue has in fact united both the left and the right, who want answers. The left is sure Donald Trump is in the pleadings, and the right thinks that Obama and Clinton are eating babies and are somehow mentioned in the Epstein files as well. I don't care. They both want it for the same reason: public accessibility to information, and that's not a bad thing. So I'm all for the push to get this information out there. I think it's damaging for the public that it's not out there, and I think at the end of the day, this could be an issue that brings us together for the first time in a long time, and it needs to be done. You've got Donald Trump cannot get away with what he's doing, and he has Trumpified enough of the members of the media, the larger companies who own it. And part of the problem is, the conflict of interest that you talked about. They have other business with the government other than news. And in fact, news is either a loss leader or a small profit margin when the movies and the missiles and all that other crap that these large companies make, and Disney, owns the world, they make a lot of money on other things, so they don't mind sacrificing the press. They don't have what we have, the investment in it. That it's just another widget to them. For those of us who dedicate our lives to doing this, it is understood that the First Amendment, you don't have to read it in freedom of speech is there. Freedom of the press is there. It's enshrined in the First Amendment for a reason, and we are there to do the job that's constitutionally protected. And they won't and don't want you to do it because they don't want you to know what they're really doing. And both the left and the right see that in this issue. And that's what makes it unique, and that's why it's not going away. And that's why Donald Trump is getting rid of people like Colbert, and that's why he's trying to make people like CBS. And Rupert Murdoch is fighting him. Rupert Murdoch is fighting him. The Wall Street Journal is fighting him. They have, so far as you said, they have said go balls to the wall with this. It can go three ways. They can settle out of court. They can get limited discovery, or they can get full discovery. And Rupert will probably, he's got more money than Trump. He doesn't mind playing this game. He could push so that they do nothing but keep him tied up in discovery for years. And that, my friends, will be something that Donald Trump won't want to do.
And let me, again, speculate just a little bit that a couple of the entities that President Trump got involved in litigation with are large law firms, and they settled, and the terms of that settlement are that they were providing tens of millions of dollars of representation for the president. And perhaps people at the time were wondering why that would be the settlement, but I guess at this point he has at least two large law firms that can defend him in these cases. Dr. Meyer, is there a historic context that you can tell us about where government leaders or governments have put forth efforts through law or litigation to silence their critics? And if so, do you think there are valid comparisons to those and the current administration's efforts here?
We can go all the way back to the founding generation, right? So the first press regulation was the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act, where President John Adams, went after Jeffersonian printers and tried to shut down what they were doing because they were criticizing the way that Adams was conducting foreign policy. And so that was an attempt to shut down the press. And what happened is that was one of the things that the Jeffersonian Party sort of ran on, the Democratic Republicans ran on in 1801, 1800 to defeat Adams and sort of take those years, right? So we can go back for generations to see, we go back to the beginning to see that the language of the First Amendment, the idea behind freedom of speech, that was a really good principle, but it's not one that everybody, once you're in power, has always been eager to live up to. So we can go all the way back to see that. In more recent terms, I think what we really need to think about is really what's happened in the last 30 years. I think when we talk about the big changes in the press, right? And I think Brian was sort of talking about this. The people who own the companies the people who own these media conglomerates that include newspapers, right? For them, news is just a dollar's way of making another dollar. It's only about profit. They don't care about the public service. It's not their interest. They're not paid to do that, right? They're paid to make a stock price go up, right? Number go up, as the Bitcoin people would tell us. That's what their job is. Now, the claim that journalism is important and is unique, that's something that journalists have always said. And, I think we wouldn't be on this call if we didn't believe it. But the idea of sort of what journalism is supposed to be was a way of insulating what happened in the newsroom from the pressure of the bosses. We need to say we're in a public service profession. Journalists will say we're telling the truth. We are doing this important work for democracy, and they are. And they need a level of independence, a level of insulation from what their bosses want to be able to do it. Now, what happens is that over the course, media consolidation is not a new phenomenon. If you go back and read books just after World War II, there was something called the Hutchins Commission, named after the president of the University of Chicago. And what they were noticing is that the news industry had started to consolidate. So, there's some cities, New York, I think, had 11 newspapers, but newspapers were closing, right? Newspapers were joining up. It was sort of creating a monopoly kind of business. And the question was, what kind of regulation could the government have over information as the media space became less crowded and less fractious? There were greater monopoly profits going to news organizations because there were just fewer competitors. And so the idea of the social responsibility theory of the press really became the dominant ethos of the press post World War II. What's happened since then, right, is that the corporations bought up the newspapers because they were basically a license to print money between 1947 and honestly the early 90s. There was nobody else doing what they were doing. There was no way. If I was a car company, I could do a TV ad. But if I wanted to let the city that I was living in know I was having a yard sale, I needed to buy a classified ad, right? Nobody else could do that. Newspapers were this unique thing. Maybe there were local. Maybe if you wanted to buy, say, the comfort of somebody at night, you were in the alt weekly. But ultimately, those were the distinctions. As news has gotten less profitable, right? Craigslist came in and swallowed up the classified ad business. Now you have online taking on more and more of the advertising dollars. Google and such take it over. You said don't go back to the beginning of time, but here it is, right? That fundamentally what's happened is that the independence of news agencies has always been a function of their economic strength. And what we have here is the loss of that economic strength, which means that the people who don't care about journalism, they don't care about the importance of an informed populace, they don't care about the role of the public in making important governing decisions. What they care about is that there's more dollars here tomorrow than there were today. And anything that gets in the way of that is going to be deemed a luxury. And that's what's happened to the news industry. So it's always been a function of that, right? It's always been a function of independence and financial profitability. What's different, right, is that we did have, in the old days, we did have some publishers who really did care. who really
I
did view themselves as part of a community, right?
I,
Brian, you've talked about working for a guy who did
yeah,
that, right?
but I think it goes. But you're talking about after World War II. I'm going to read. This is from Prejudice 6 series. This is 1927, and this is H.L. Mencken. As a result of the application of chain store methods to journalism by these amiable vandals, all the multitudinous Hearst papers are subsequently identical, as are all the Scripps Howard papers, the Curtis papers, the Muncie papers. There is little room on the papers for such chains for the young men to aspire. In the early days of Hearst, his people were smart and bright. He said, now a Hearst paper, however inflammatory, is no more than a single unit in a long row of filling stations. And so it tends to attract only dull and less picturesque sort of men. The rewards of the trade used to come in freedom, opportunity, the incomparable delights of self-expression. Now they come in money. That's 100 years ago. I think that this has been ongoing way before World War II. I think it's been ongoing since you talked about the beginning during the Jeffersonian era when they were, it always happens. What has eviscerated us this time around is that we were late getting into understanding what the internet was and is. We didn't capitalize upon it very well. We still don't know how to market it worth a damn. But at the end of the day, journalism is still providing vetted factual information, and this is just another method of doing it. It's just another platform. So you've got people still crawling up their ass and screaming bloody murder that, the internet has destroyed us. Well, no, it's it's this insular inbreeding of people who sell ads running newspapers and television stations. They graduate from being senior accountants to and salesmen to running the side of the business they have no business being involved in, and that's the editorial side. Every station manager usually comes through advertising. Many times publishers come through advertising. The editors themselves are not the publishers. But and in cases where they are, you talk about look slap suits, examples of them. Washington apple farmers sued CBS after a 60-minute segment discussed the dangers of ALAR. Sharper Image sued Consumer Union for a negative review of its air purifier. The woman in Kansas who last year her office was raided and pressured by government entities. She died the day after the raid. They were sued. This is all part and parcel of how people who don't want the information out there react to those of us who are trying to give the information to the public. Don't shoot the messenger has been replaced by, I have a Second Amendment right to kill you. That's all it boils down to. And it's been ongoing forever, and it has picked up pace now with the internet and the inability for people to understand social media.
I think it's interesting, the Hearst papers example, right? And a Hearst paper was probably much more aggressive than any paper that we see today right now, right? But they saw that too, right? That would have been, the Hearst paper would have been wonderful now if we had some of those people who wanted to fight. I think the ultimate challenge has always been that the needs of the business have always been that the needs of the business should align. Ideally, they align with the editorial mission, right? There are people in communities, community journalists, people who do papers in small cities, people who do these sort of single issue things. The models of the internet model doesn't work for a local newspaper because the ads cost less. There's digital ads cost less, and there's always a few people who produce those ads. When I was working in Northern California, we were basically fully reliant on the real estate brokers, right? They published the housing supplement each week was 62% of our income was what we were told in the newsroom. All right. Now everyone's on Zillow, right? Like they're not publishing those things. Those things don't matter as much. All of these unique functions that newspapers held in communities, both as producers of commerce, as sort of connections between buyers and sellers, with the news, which was supposed to be the main selling point, wrapped around it. All of those, the money that supported the news gathering operation came from the advertisers, and the advertisers have gone elsewhere. And so what we need to be talking about is what is going to replace that, right? That's been a lot of the interesting work in journalism research has come from. And you do see new models starting to appear. I don't want to say that I'm like down on the internet. I want to sort of come back to this point here, right? That the internet has enabled, we can reach local news that we wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And we can also find subject matter experts who are journalistically inclined into certain topics, right? So there are certain issues for whom there are outlets that are really well attuned to that single issue. I'm sort of thinking of when I'm interested in news about sort of the transgender movement, right? There's a website called Assigned Media, right? That's just like a single one or two people who run that sort of cover all of these issues. There are these sort of experts that can create their own perspectives and be out there, and you can get information that you wouldn't get access to. So I do think that the internet has been valuable in that regard. What I would say is that we have to rely a little bit on ourselves, right? Does the story make sense? You can read the corporate media, and you're going to get basically the yes and no's, right? You're going to get what people are saying, but ultimately, right, you have to sort of make sense of it for yourself as a reader, and that can be hard because you don't know what you don't know. So read, but also read toward a level of understanding. Read toward making a choice about what you think is right, what sounds reasonable.
Well, I'm happy with this episode because I think we've talked about. Brian is giving peace signs, by the way. You have to make some noise, and your camera will come on, and then. There we. Sometimes I feel like it's not satisfying to hear some of this stuff, and if it does bother you, that you may not be getting good information, credible information based on what we talked about today, then please follow the advice of the two people that just spoke with you, Mike and Brian, about places where you can go. So thanks, Brian. Thanks, Mike. I hope our audience today found this discussion to be helpful when it comes to consuming news and to finding good, credible information. As always, we'd appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe, and join us again soon for another edition of Hard Pass. Fiona?
As always, thanks from the whole team here at Hard Pass. Please join us again soon for another episode of our podcast. And if you don't mind, hit the like and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.